Football is a violent game no matter what the NFL tries to tell you. And while regular season games are plenty intense on their own, the postseason generally takes it to a whole new level of intensity, and sometimes violence. We have seen some absolute bloodbaths over the years. So without much further ado, let's take a look back at 10 of the most violent NFL playoff games of all time. For most of today's NFL fans, the first place that their minds go when they think of a violent playoff game is to Cincinnati in 2016, where the Bengals hosted the divisional rival Pittsburgh Steelers in what many consider to be one of the single most violent NFL games of this era. There were a number of reasons that the game got out of hand. For starters, the AFC North is known for its hard-nosed, blue-collar style of football, and when two teams who are both entrenched in that mindset play one another for the third time that year, with a season on the line no less. Needless to say, it was going to be contentious on that field no matter what. Since he was also playing with a chip on their shoulder, the team hadn't won a playoff game since 1991, but they had home field advantage in this wild card battle, and while they had one of their best teams ever that season, they were entering this matchup with backup quarterback A.J. McCarron under center, because their starter, Andy Dalton, was injured against that very same Steelers team a few weeks earlier. Then when you factor in some of the personalities on both teams, I'm looking at you, Antonio Brown and Vontaze Burfict, well, it's no shocker that both teams effectively failed to control their emotions. For anyone who doesn't remember this one, it was an absolute slobber knocker. There were huge hits delivered by both teams throughout, and then the game hit a fever pitch during its closing minutes. Bengals star receiver A.J. Green had just hauled in a touchdown pass from A.J. McCarron to go ahead by 1 point, and shortly after Pittsburgh got the ball back since he snagged an interception. But on the very next play, Bengals running back Jeremy Hill coughed it up and the Steelers started charging. Big Ben was nursing an injured shoulder, but he did his best to dink and dunk Pittsburgh up the field, making it to the opposing 47-yard line with 22 seconds to go. At that point, chaos erupted. Ben was trying to find AB downfield on a first down play, and that was when the infamous decapitation by Burfict took place.
Was talking on the sideline the whole time, it seemed like, to Vontaze Burfict, and yes.
Oh my God. Not only was it a hideously dirty play, but also a stupid one from a football perspective. That penalty in tandem with an unsportsmanlike conduct by Bengals cornerback Adam Jones jettisoned the Steelers into gimme field goal range. And just like that, the Bengals' hopes of winning a postseason game vanished as Chris Boswell's kick rocketed between the uprights. The media roasted Cincinnati afterwards, specifically Burfict and his head coach Marvin Lewis, who many felt let that game get away from the team. So much so that people were literally calling for Lewis's job after the game. What a mess. But that is what happens, I suppose. Most fans and members of the media alike have lost their appetite for any gratuitous violence, particularly when it comes to hits towards the head, which is why Jadeveon Clowney caught quite a bit of negative attention for the role that he played in a playoff game a couple of years ago between the Seahawks and the Philadelphia Eagles. The crazy part about Clowney in this game in question is that the hit he delivered on Carson Wentz took place super early in the game and really set the tone for a hard-hitting, drag-it-out affair.
Onto the ground, and he takes a hard hit to the back of his head by Jadeveon Clowney, who himself is playing hurt with a core injury.
The Seahawks' controversial defensive lineman drew the ire of the media and fans alike after the game. He tried to talk his way out of it, explaining to ESPN's Josina Anderson afterwards, "I was just rushing the passer. It was a bang-bang play. I didn't intentionally try to hurt nobody. I just played this game with a lot of enthusiasm and effort. It was just a bang-bang play. I hope he's okay and that everything will be okay with him." Either way, the hit broke the heart of Eagles fans, who had to watch their star quarterback leave in the first quarter of a playoff game, and led to what was a vicious back and forth in which Seattle, somewhat unsurprisingly considering Philly lost its starting quarterback, came out on top of 17-9. As they say, the bad guys won, which is actually sort of a trend on this list. A lot of teams who brought that extra edge and really incited the violence on the field during these games are the ones who actually end up coming out on top as well. Like the New Orleans Saints did during two of the most violent postseason games we've seen, both of which took place in 2009 during the Saints' infamous Bountygate run. For any of our younger fans who perhaps don't remember Bountygate, it was a scandal that the Saints organization got caught up in, where they financially incentivized their players to knock out the opposing team's key players during games. It cost former Saints head coach Sean Payton a full year of his coaching career. Defensive coordinator Greg Williams was suspended indefinitely and banned from even applying for reinstatement for 2 years. General manager Mickey Loomis was suspended for 8 games, and the team was also fined $500,000 and docked 2 high draft picks. Now, if you are seeing that massive laundry list of punishments and thinking, hey, that seems like it might be a little harsh, I have news for you, they got off light. If you watch what they did to a couple of unsuspecting older men, Brett Favre and Kurt Warner, during that postseason, man, it was nasty.
McCray, you're going to see him right here, the left side. I mean, he just comes up, and Favre was working that way to make the hand.
The hits started early, and they were unrelenting, which I suppose wouldn't be surprising considering that, according to Sports Illustrated, the price to knock Minnesota Vikings quarterback Brett Favre out of the NFC title game was $35,000. In classic Brett Favre fashion, he didn't let the violence get to him, just the loss, as he has since explained. It was that type of game. I think they called like 5 roughing the quarterbacks, but they should have called like 12. I don't hate Greg Williams, it is what it is. We still had a chance to win the game. When I think about that game, not for a second am I thinking about how they played against me. I wonder if Kurt Warner felt the same way, as he took quite a few licks of his own the round before and garnered much less sympathy and attention in the whole ordeal. I mean, look at this hit.
Fitzgerald. Warner on 2nd and 7. It is intercepted by Will Smith.
I know this was only 10 or so years ago, but if this happened in today's NFL, to a quarterback no less, I can only imagine what the punishment and backlash would be, especially because the hits were so egregiously dirty. It's not like we don't still see violent playoff games, though. In fact, just this year, between the Bengals and Titans, we witnessed one of the most intense back-and-forths I can remember. And while he'll never admit it to the media, I bet if you got Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow alone and asked him, he'd tell you he was feeling pretty beat up after taking 9 sacks and being under fire from the Titans' defensive line all game. At least Burrow got the dub, though, representing the victims well, Joe. Although victims might be the wrong word, because the Bengals' defense, to their credit, also laid some pretty intense hits in what ended up being in many ways a defensive slugfest. But nevertheless, we have seen other quarterbacks over the years fold in these sort of situations, like Cam Newton in his career-defining Super Bowl 50 loss to the Denver Broncos. During that game, Cam was sacked 6 times, as the Broncos' defense ran ragged against Carolina's O-line. And when you factor in all the hits Cam took in the running game, well, maybe it shouldn't come as such a surprise that he decided to make his infamous business decisions at the end of the game. The man was beaten to a pulp all night, and realistically speaking, that game was on its way to becoming out of hand. I know the score was relatively close, but the reality is that Denver physically dominated Carolina, and Cam in particular, all night. So it all sort of checks out. After being the focal point of one of the most violent Super Bowls in recent years, we should have seen Cam's waving of the white flag as inevitable. And to be honest, while I don't know if Cam had it all played out in his head the moment that he chose to not try and dive on that ball, he might have been wise to steer clear. Of course, when it comes to violence in the Super Bowl, this wasn't the Broncos' first rodeo. They know that sometimes you have to put your body on the line in order to reach the pinnacle, as they learned while winning their first Lombardi trophy at Super Bowl 32. That punishing affair between Denver and the Green Bay Packers was highlighted by 2 of the most brutal hits in Super Bowl history. First, there was John Elway's helicopter run, during which the Hall of Fame quarterback put his body on the line to get a crucial 3rd down conversion with the game tied late in the 3rd quarter. And then, with less than a minute remaining, the Broncos clinging to a 7-point lead, safety Steve Atwater threw his body into harm's way, knocking himself, Packers receiver Robert Brooks, and teammate Andy Hillard out cold. The triple KO was easily one of the hardest collisions you'll ever see in NFL playoff history. This all just goes to show how far Denver was willing to go in order to claim their franchise's first ever Super Bowl victory, which they did. It doesn't always turn out that way, though. Just ask the '86 Niners, who were on the receiving end of one of the worst beatdowns in NFL playoff history, not only physically but on the scoreboard as well. The Giants' defense was relentless during that 1986 divisional round battle. Not only did they limit the Niners' offense to just 184 total yards and 1 measly field goal during their 49-3 win, but they made them earn every single one of those yards by laying a relentless beating on the Niners. And no one felt it more than Joe Montana. The star quarterback was knocked out of the game thanks to this brutal hit from Jim Burt, which he took while throwing a pick-6 to Lawrence Taylor. The hit was so bad that Montana had to leave the Giants stadium in an ambulance. Yikes. Whenever the ambulance comes out, you know things are getting a little too violent. Speaking of violence, that word always seems to come to mind whenever the Pittsburgh Steelers and Baltimore Ravens take the field. So it's not surprising that one of the biggest games in their rivalry, the 2008 AFC Championship game, is also one of the most violent. This game had everything you'd expect from a Steelers-Ravens bout, but with an added bit of intensity. There was the after the whistle stuff.
Hands to the face.
It's going to get it for the retaliation.
Yes, that's what it is.
The knockout blows like this one that KO'd both Willis McGahee and Ryan Clark late in the 4th quarter, as Baltimore was trying to put up some points and keep their Super Bowl hopes alive.
What a hit, ball's out.
Even the tougher guys like Hines Ward were having a hard time shaking off all the bumps and bruises that were mounting from this hard-hitting affair. It took a lot to get the Steelers wet out to show signs of pain back then.
But instead they pick up the first down with Ward. Stepping in.
That's how brutal this game really was, albeit it was a lot less brutal for the Steelers because at least they came away with a 23-14 victory to book their ticket to the Super Bowl. And speaking of Super Bowl, we take you to the 35th edition of the big game, where the Ravens were setting the tone early and often en route to dismantling the Giants for their first ever Lombardi trophy. There were plenty of big hits in this one, most of which were doled out by the Ravens, but there's really just two that you need to see in order to get an idea of how violent this game really was. The first came on the very first play of the second quarter as Baltimore linebacker Jamie Sharper dropped a boom on Giants wideout Ike Hillard across the middle. It still amazes me that Hillard was able to get up after that hit and continue playing. Likewise for Tiki Barber, who was on the receiving end of an absolutely brutal shot from multiple Ravens players during a second-half punt return.
45. To the 45. Oh, what a collision at the 45-yard line.
Just listening to that sound of the impact makes you cringe a bit. But it was a sound that was heard quite often during the Ravens' 34-7 victory, making it easily one of the most violent Super Bowls we've ever witnessed. Which do you think was the most violent NFL postseason game of all time? Did we miss anything? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you liked the video, then hit the like button. We'd really appreciate it. If you're not subscribed yet, now's a great time to do that by hitting that subscribe button down there. And until next time, tune in to TPS every single day for more cool videos. We'll see you.